doing this.
Right?
I think this is so good. All right, we're starting up.
It's a great day. It's a good day.
Oh, yeah. Woo! Welcome. Welcome, risers. Welcome, thrivers. It is going to be a good day. It is an excellent day. We are so happy that you are back with us today. We are here live. We're a little bit green with the live, so thank you for your patience with us. We're really enjoying the live environment, though, so please send us some love and ask us questions along the way. We are here to serve in any way that we can. We hope that you truly found inspiration in our last few shows that we put out. The last two shows were all for parents and to best serve parents and inspire and empower those parents on their paths with their children. So we hope you found a lot of inspiration there. Today, we have our guest host, Bachand, with us back again. He was such a hit last time. He's back for a few more recordings, and we're so lucky to have him here with us today. Brian is from Evolution. If you are not familiar with his work, do check out his work. He is a phenomenal human being, and I just could not be any more luckier to have him on the stage with me today. So thank you for being here, Brian.
It's a joy. Thank you, Erica, for the invite.
Thank you. And we are so happy to have this conversation with Brad Reed, who has spent years struggling with mental health and chronic pain. Brian, will you please help me introduce Brad and welcome him to our stage?
Absolutely. It's a real joy to welcome today Brad Reed here to Rise Today. He is rising very early, coming to us live from Vietnam right now, where it's 4 o'clock in the morning. And Brad has an incredible journey and story to share with us today. After years suffering from mental health issues and severe chronic pain, Brad healed himself and changed his life, and he moved to Asia, courageously moving to a whole new place and trusting in the process. And it took him on a journey of self-discovery, growth, humility, and insight to finally reach a point where he was fully healed and able to help others. He is the proud founder and coach of a company called Repurpose You, coaching and training business leaders to really be aligned to who they are. Brad's goal is simply this: to help empower those he coaches to become the best version of themselves. Please join me in welcoming Brad Reed today, live from Vietnam.
Woohoo! Welcome, Brad.
I already did this privately, but Robin Williams said, "Good morning, Vietnam," huh?
Love that. Yeah, we're so happy to have you here with us, Brad. So take us back to help us, our listeners, just shape things from the get-go. Take us back even before the mental health struggles. Tell us a bit about your life, starting from scratch.
Sure. I mean, pretty average upbringing. I came from, a middle-class household in London, Ontario, Canada, which is 2 hours south of Toronto. People know Toronto, so I'll reference that. It's where Brian lives now. And, things were relatively standard. There wasn't really any, major highs or lows, just like you would say, like a normal upbringing, relatively speaking. Yeah. And, I got into high school, and mental health issues started at 14. So do you want me to go back a little further and keep going, or we can start there?
Well, I'm curious, what do you feel was the trigger? If you kind of grew up with this, quote unquote normal childhood, and you served as a very happy child, what do you think was that trigger at age 14 that kind of started this path for you?
Well, I remember it was really severe anxiety. And I would get these thoughts of horrific things happening in my life. And I don't know where that came from or where it emanated from. And it turns out it was a form of OCD. And you call it morbid OCD when, you're sort of obsessed with negative events occurring, and really extreme ones too. And I remember at the time, around 14, mental health was still weird. You know what I mean? It was still one of those things that there were support systems there, but it was like, what do I do? Who do I really talk to? How do I explain this? And I went in to see my school guidance counselor, and it was like, one of the most profound days ever, because I was so scared, so lost, and I felt so isolated.
And so you even went for help? You didn't
Sure.
take that big step, right?
Sure.
Despite the
Yeah.
stigma that you're talking about mental
Sure.
health. So you take that first step, and then you see this guidance counselor, and I'm guessing it wasn't the most positive experience.
The guidance counselor was fine, but at the time, I don't think they had the training to deal with it. So they had an in school psychologist who I went to go see. No problem. And even he was a little bit befuddled. He's like, well, I don't know. He gave me some techniques that were a little bit strange to try, and I didn't. But then he referred me to a community psychologist who was wonderful. He was wonderful. So finally, I got the help. But I remember the amount of relief that I had when I first went to see that guidance counselor. It was like the weight of the world had lifted, because for the first time at that point, it would have been months of really suffering alone and isolated and feeling helpless in a sense. At the very least, at this time, I was being listened to. And I'm sure some of our listeners can relate to that, which is like, finally, I have a voice. And I remember just that step alone was wonderfully empowering, because it was like, oh my God, at least I can release it and somebody's there. I don't know what's going to happen, but at least when I go to the guidance counselor, something was like, oh, okay, somebody knows.
It's that importance of validation, right? Like having our circle not even try to fix something necessarily, even our own supports, not even going for a therapy session, but even in the circles that we currently have as our own friends or family, and just having that space to be vulnerable with someone else, and having that simple step of validation, so important. I'm curious though, you talk about the stigma of mental health, right? And that you made that big step to go in and start being open about it. But what gave you that courage at 14 years old to be able to be open about it? What was it that really inspired that bravery and that courage in you at that time? Because I find that really admirable and remarkable.
Well, I'm not sure if I at the time, if I can recall the feeling. I'm 32 now, so it's been a little while. And I think at the time it was desperation, actually, Erica, to be honest with you. I felt the need. There was such a draw to do something. And at every major point in my life, when things have gotten really serious, I've always found the willpower to do something. So I think it was really willpower coupled with desperation. It was really to the point where I can't take this anymore. It was quite bad. It was quite isolating. It was confusing. I wasn't enjoying my days. I wasn't enjoying my evenings. I was becoming a little more regressed socially, a little more regressed in terms of, my performance was getting worse. And so it was just, at the time, it was very, very, very overwhelming, and I had to do something. And
it sounds like you also then made a choice for you.
Yeah, sure.
To fight for you. That's
very
really
much
great. Yeah.
Very much.
What was it like? I mean, did you speak to your family as well? I know you went to the counselor, but did you share what some of your struggles with your parents or your siblings at that time as well?
I did. Mom and dad, and I love my parents dearly. We have a great relationship, but again, they just grew up, they're baby boomers, and they grew up in an age where, their parents came back from the war, saw horrendous things, and never spoke about it. It just wasn't, they just didn't have the tools, or they weren't equipped to deal with it. And it's not their fault. They weren't callous or rude. They just didn't know necessarily how to respond. And so that was part of the isolation too. Again, not their fault, but mom didn't really get it. Again, it was at that point where, if you look back, 16, 17 years ago, it still wasn't, it was still, in a sense, the word taboo, or it was on the margin still. So it wasn't top of people's mind. You didn't have Bell Let's Talk days and things like that. And so, yeah, they knew, but not to the extent of the severity. And once they found out to the extent and the severity, they were actually quite supportive, which was nice. But I had to compel that. I had to drive that whole process, right? Yeah.
Did you feel shame because of that stigma, because it wasn't talked about? Did you feel any shame for what you were going through?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. I was like, what's wrong with me? There's got to be something. That's made it worse. That compound effect is that sort of negative feedback that I was giving myself. Like, there's got to be something wrong with me. I don't know what, I'm going crazy. This is bizarre. I'd see a movie about it, and I would imagine myself being that crazy guy kind of thing. It was at times it wasn't so good. So yeah, for sure, lots of shame. That's
So how
that's a
did you
really
keep
good word for it, Erica. Shame.
Well, how did you
Yeah.
keep putting one foot in front of the other? So let's say I always we're here to inspire listeners, right? Who may be feeling that same way, right?
Mhm.
And so how can we help inspire? Sorry, my headset just fell out. How can we help inspire those listeners who may be walking in similar grounds? They might be 14 too, right? How can we inspire them to take those first steps to really reach out and to get that support?
Well, I think that the encouraging thing about today is there's so much support. And I think your support can look different than mine, which is beautiful. I had to do this, dramatic walk into the office at school and find a guidance counselor, and I was dreading it the whole time. But there's so many things online today, like Google. You have organizations as part of workplaces that do these outbound call services. Friends and family are much more aware of these things right now. Canadian Mental Health Association's done a great job. I believe their numbers readily available on Google. And in terms of the courage to take the steps, one little baby step can be so absolutely transformative because you don't know what's on the other side of help, right? That's the thing. That was the big shift. I didn't know what was on the other side of help. I just knew the pain and the suffering.
I love that idea, right? It really does come down to those small, simple steps. Sometimes we create these goals and they're too like overarching, right? And then we almost set ourselves up for defeat. So these really small, simple tasks are so, so, so important. So yeah, just really breaking that down we had another guest recently who had talked about her weight loss mission, right? But really breaking each section down to one choice at a time, right? Really could be of use even here. So can you please describe a bit more? So you talk about this anxiety that you experienced and this idea of morbid anxiety. Were you concerned about something terrible happening to yourself or to those around you that you loved?
Both.
And
it was actually, let me backtrack. It was mostly the people I cared about. That was the interesting. That's why part of that, there was so much shame involved in that. Because I'm like, why do I keep thinking these things? Why do I keep imagining these things? What is going on here? And so that's what made it so disturbing, because it wasn't so much about me in that, and at least at that time, that was what I was struggling with in those years. And so that's one of the things that made it was, quite frankly, some days dreadful.
And what were the triggers that would make this anxiety worse?
I think, the spiraling. One thought would start another, and then another, and then another. And so there was environmental triggers, I don't think, at the time. And I think it was just mood would have been one. If I woke up not feeling so good, we tend to spiral. If we look at the thought, emotion, body feedback loop, it's like, okay, one bad thought and you don't feel good, and your thoughts and emotions, they're connected, and all these sorts of things. So any specific triggers, I'm not sure, but possibly at the time, my actual social network wasn't the best. My first year or so of school, I was quite isolated to begin with. And so I didn't have a solid social sphere, not a lot of friends to hang out with, not a lot of socializing or support. And that could have been a possible trigger as well. But I believe, because, I used to spend Friday nights watching Star Trek for 4 hours. I remember on Channel 32, and I forget what it was called, the new TNN or something like that. And I would spend Friday nights watching Star Trek kind of thing. Before I ended up developing quite a big social circle later, but I think that may have had something to do with it, Erica.
Hey, Brad, what was it like? I mean, you're taking some positive steps and but still having triggers. How did that impact like your academic work? In high school at that time, there's so much pressure about, where are you going to university? What are next steps? How did that start to spiral and affect your life as well?
Well, I was very lucky, because when I started to go into therapy, that particular style of anxiety was completely healed. That was one of the most relieving things. I first went to the school psychologist, and then I went to an inpatient or outpatient psychiatrist at London Health Sciences Center. And then I found a community psychologist, and we worked through it. So we did cognitive behavioral therapy, and we worked through it. So at that point, that particular aspect of that very bizarre extreme form of anxiety was dealt with. Thankfully, I'm so thankful, so grateful for Dr. Ken Foley, who's now retired.
Okay, before we go on, what were some of the tools that Dr. Foley helped you with to overcome that anxiety?
Sure. So I'm going to call it cognitive frame shifting. I don't know the technical term for it, but he would take one of those scenarios.
Yeah.
Say it was mom or dad falling off a building. He'd take one of those extreme scenarios that I would imagine, and we would play with it. So he'd be like, okay, well, they're going to fall off a building, Brad. Cool. Well, why don't you picture a trampoline at the bottom of the building?
So you changed the way you saw it.
Yeah, so I call it cognitive.
I
train this in workshops now. Cognitive reappraisal is what psychologists call, if you're going to reflect on a negative event, turn into positive events.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's the technical term for what he did, but that's what I was doing in my brain. And I made these scenarios quite funny. So, there'd be a trampoline at the bottom, and mom and dad they'd bounce off the trampoline into the clouds, and they'd start flying and be like, oh, well, that's not too bad. And so, I would trigger humor. And that would bring harmony. So I think I changed the triggers and I changed the feedback loop, and that was one of the things that we went through, and it was great.
That's really insightful. I mean, I talk a lot with my clients about reframing their stories and rewriting their stories, right, in a more empowering way, and how that story can actually serve them. But what a great idea with these visualizations, even that you're having to reframe and reshift that visualization. I think that's powerful. Yeah,
and I was such an extreme form too. And so this worked at the extremities. So easily this can work in the middle, or if you're looking at the spectrum, I was here. And if you're here, these kinds of exercises can be encouraged, for anybody, even if you're having a rough moment or a bad hour or a bad day, try them. They're just beautiful. Another thing that we did was we kept an eye on sort of my ridiculous self-doubt, which was great. And so he helped put things into not a short-term perspective, but sort of a long-term perspective. Like, will this really be an issue a month from now? That was helping with more normal anxiety, that I call it. And we would reframe my thinking around issues, and we would look at things in a more long-term perspective, so I wouldn't get caught up in all those details. And so that was one of the useful tools too, from what I remember.
Really helpful. And were you able to actually identify where this all stemmed from in the first place? I
don't know. It was a horror movie. You know what? I didn't remember until just like literally 2 seconds ago, Erica. So yeah, it was a horror movie. That's what it was. And I remember leaving that horror movie and I was horrified.
So traumatized.
Yeah, that was the trigger. That was the trigger, actually, now that I remember. And it was no particular horror movie for any particular reason. I remember asking the psychiatrist about this. I'm like, did that have anything to do with it? He's like, no, it was just the straw that broke the camel's back. So that was.
Yeah, who knows, really? Just curious. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. No, I appreciate that. It's
But you use a term that I like, your ridiculous self-doubt. I like that. So how do you define ridiculous self-doubt? I mean, we all have self-doubt at times, but what makes it ridiculous self-doubt?
I think it was to the extremes, in the sense that, like, one day I won't be able to get out of the house. This illness is going to drive me crazy. I'll be isolated in my bedroom. I'm not going to have a future. So the normal issues, I remember one of the isolating things, these worries at the time were so horrific that I wished for normal kid problems, normal teenager problems. I'm like, I wish I could worry about finding a girlfriend, or I wish I could worry about school, or I wish I could worry about normal things, because I was so preoccupied and caught up in this loop of, really extreme thinking that I just, everything was extreme. So when I say ridiculous self-doubt, it was like, man, I can't even worry about graduating right now. I got to worry about making sure that I don't get locked up in the asylum. Like, there was just those aspects. The magnitude of my worry was just so much larger than what the average was. And I remember, I think that answers your question, Brian, was about ridiculous. Like, it really was. Some of them were ridiculous, but at the time they felt very real. That was the scary thing. It felt so real, right? Subjectively, very, very real. And so that was one of the beauties of seeking help, was dealing with that, and eventually relieving myself, so to speak. Yeah.
We have a great question. I love this one. Dwight, can you leave this up for a bit? Because I want to get to this in a little bit. I really appreciate this question, and we will get to this very quickly. Before we do that, Brad, I want to hear, so you're going through high school, right? You're struggling with these anxieties. You kind of overcome most of the grandiosity of these morbid anxieties that you're experiencing. But then you talk later about, really years of experiencing mental health consequences and even chronic pain syndrome. So can you elaborate a bit more on that?
Well, I think, high school went okay. And then towards the end, I really excelled. I became sort of a high school hero. I remember going back several years later and, I got into a lot of trouble in high school, not in a bad way. I was never mean or vindictive or things like that, but I was just bored and, not focused. And towards the end, after that extreme anxiety was sort of dealt with, I had standard anxiety, you would call it. Finally, at least normal things to worry about. Okay, I was a little anxious through high school, the rest of high school. I could deal with that. And I was a little moody, that could be dealt with. And then did really well my final years of high school. And then I went off to university. And then when I went off to university, there was a few bouts in between where things got really bad again. Really, really bad again. And when I say really bad, part of it was triggered by, I knew I wasn't studying the right things or moving in the right direction for my life. And that produced sort of wells of deep depression. I would spiral right out of control to the point where I'd be up till 5:30, 6 a.m., wasn't being productive, wasn't doing my schoolwork. And so it got to the point where my depression was so deep that I had to get on prescription antidepressants at around, I want to say 1920. I don't remember.
And did you find that helpful?
At the time, yeah. At the time, yes, indeed. I remember that the transformation for me at the time was night and day.
Wow.
Now, I since don't endorse antidepressants so much, and we can get into that later. But at the time, whether it was real or placebo, I don't know. But I felt better, for sure, without question. And it gave me a lot of my freedom back because I wasn't burdened. I was living on my own at the time, and I wasn't burdened with this like really deep level depression that was just crippling. Absolutely crippling. Like I couldn't even function. I didn't care about anything. It was like, I don't care about school. I don't care about this. And I remember one of the irritating things for me when I went to seek some help for this at a few times during my academic career in university was they always had a bias towards you must be anxious because of schoolwork. And they were trying to normalize it. And I remember because so many students probably rush in to see them and they want to skip their exams or do things like that. And okay, fine. But they were trying to frame it for me. And they're like, this is normal. You should feel like this. It's a stressful time of year. I'm like, no, like, I don't care about my exams. You don't understand. Like I could care less. There's major issues going on here and I need some help. And so,
yeah, I've experienced that myself too, where, I think certain ones in these professions, they just see these things so often, right? So they almost just automatically bulk us into these categories. And I know I also experienced this in a bit of a different way, but I remember waking up in the hospital one night and I completely could not breathe. I had recently been diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia and I just could not breathe. And I woke up literally gasping for air. And my nurse came in and I just adore this nurse. I still adore her now. She came in and she was like, oh, you're just anxious. Everyone in here has anxiety and just, just calm and just take a few deep breaths. And, I'm like, oh, I don't think I'm anxious right now. I can't breathe, but I think I'm anxious now because I can't breathe. I don't think it's the anxiety causing the lack of breathing. And, but then she's like patting my back and I'm like, I think I'm going crazy here, like I'm just like doubting myself then. And I'm like trying really hard. And, sure enough, they find out a few hours later that my lungs had so much fluid in them. But I think the automatic go-to for so many, right, is just to go with this norm, but taking a more individualized approach to each and every human that walks through our doors is so, so, so important. So that's a really good point that you raised.
Agreed, very much.
Brad, what would you have liked someone to say to you at that time, rather than just saying, oh, it's, just because your exam or you're stressed out? What would you have liked to have heard from someone at that time?
This in sense is going to partly answer the listener's question, but just to listen.
Just to listen. That's great. Yeah.
Like really listen, you know what I mean? And be present and engaged and take what I say very seriously. Because that, to me, it's a night and day difference when someone's with you and engaged with you and present with you. You can tell. And
this is exactly what you said right from the get-go when you reached out and took out that first step for help with your guidance counselor, right? Just that you had that space to be vulnerable and most importantly, to be validated. So yes, in response to this question, again, I too would support that 100%. Just create that safe space. And in my own coaching programs, I always advocate for the really important step to be real, right? And there's almost this like inherent societal pressure to be positive no matter what is happening on our journeys. But the first really important step is to be really real about those hardships and to allow ourselves the space to experience those negative emotions and process them and let them out in this safe space. And again, not necessarily having someone that we're talking with try to fix it. Right? Because that's also really important. Sometimes something can't be fixed right on that day, right? When I'm facing a terminal prognosis with leukemia, I don't necessarily want someone to say, it's going to be okay, right? Because I don't even know what's going to happen at that point. I just want someone to say, shoot, I get how hard this is, right? Or just validate what I'm going through at that time. And I think that would be the same in this scenario. Just so important to let that person be really real and have that safe space to do so and be fully vulnerable, because there's so much power in that vulnerability, and we can really allow ourselves that space to let down all of those walls around us and all those guards that we all hold. There is power in that, and that is where the power and the magic comes from to transform from that point. But and I'm so passionate about this because in my early days of having cancer, I was like, oh yeah, this is just totally a blip, right? Just a blip. Like, I'm going to be fine. I've got an 80% chance of responding to the first round of chemotherapy. Come watch me on my exercise bike. Like, what can I get you from my cocktail of choice, ice or no ice from the water fountain, and it was just a blip. And I didn't want to let any of that hurt in. I didn't want to recognize the grandiosity of cancer that was in front of me, right? Because this was I needed to be positive. I needed to have that positive outlook, but this was all just kind of surreal, right? I needed to let myself grieve the emotions of all that cancer had ripped away, or for you, all that mental health issues had ripped away at that time, right? We really need to encourage everyone in our space to be so real. Yes. Very important, Brad. Thank you.
Welcome. The one thing I would say too is I trained with peer support counseling. And one of the things that we always talked about when responding to someone in mental health crisis, specifically, I did this exact thing, which is responding to, we called it mental health first aid. So responding to people in crisis. And one of the things that we want to avoid is victimization or, compounding. So if they're sharing sort of a traumatic story or something that's deeply disturbing, we don't want to say that sounds horrible. Because we feel like we're echoing their sentiment, but what we're doing is we can validate their negative response to things. Mm-hmm. So we want to be neutral in our language. It's like, okay,
excellent point.
Thank you for sharing, and I'm here to support you. And what can I do for you? So we want to be relatively nurturing and encouraging, but relatively neutral when it comes to responding to things that for them are deeply troubling. And then we want to guide the discussion in a direction, which is to support. What can I do to support you? How can I help? Is there anything you need to drive? Do you want to go? Whatever, things like that. So that would be one more thing I would add to that question.
Thank you to our listener for that question. So how did the chronic pain side of it come out? How did all these mental health, tell me the relation, because this too I'm very passionate about, right? Sure, the mind and the body connection. So please elaborate more on that.
Sure. So that's a deep one. That's a real interesting journey. So I decided, after really discovering holistic health and reading a lot about, depression and anxiety and how to heal yourself and optimize your brain. And again, things were still a little bit on the periphery. It was about 10 years ago now, 10 years ago. I realized, antidepressants long-term, this is not a good idea. This is just not a good idea. And at the time, actually, the side effects were not good. I at one point when I was taking the full 10 milligrams daily, it was, I was sleeping 12, 14 hours a day. And if I didn't sleep 12 or I slept 10, I would just sleep past alarms and not care. I'd miss appointments and not care. I'd miss my lectures and not care. There was a pretty high level of apathy, and it was fatigue and apathy. And so there's a few other side effects, if I can recall, but I was like, you know what, I got to cut this crap out. And so I weaned myself off of those. over a period of, several months, which isn't easy for a lot of people, by the way.
Hmm. Did you speak to a physician about weaning yourself off of the
Great
medication,
point.
or was it your decision, or was it something you kind of worked together on?
It was my decision, and I spoke to them, and they were supportive in that sense, because I wanted to go the holistic route. But again, the modern psychiatry, and it's very, there's such an emphasis on pharmaceuticals, and I think their information's so wrong, because I've always listened to the patients. So I've read forums and blogs and people who've had not good experiences with benzodiazepines or antidepressants, and they can be extremely dangerous medications, extremely dangerous. And if you don't wean yourself off them properly, they can produce short-term and long-term effects. And so I was very careful about that.
I think so important. I'm just going to add a little note in for our listeners too, because so important. We're here to share these personal stories, right? And I think these medications also do have a purpose in certain context, right? Yes. And so we're not here to advise globally on anyone's path and to take anyone off medications or to advocate. We're just here to really share tools as to how to best stay the course and move forward. And so these decisions are Brad's decisions, and if you feel similar decisions, chat with your physicians, right? But just wanted to point that out.
I was just going to qualify. I'm not a certified medical professional. This is just my opinion, okay?
But really great, and it's so important to share. So that's why we're here.
And they do serve their purpose without question. And some people, they're highly transformative, and the difference between medication and non-medication for them is life-saving. And so again, but like anything, there's definitely some challenges with there. And so I wean myself off slowly. Originally the doctor said, a couple of weeks. I'm like, no, man, that's a little foolish. So I took, 3 to 4 months, I think. And then things were okay. I mean, things were sort of back to normal. There was I wasn't feeling great, but I wasn't feeling good, but at least I was off the meds. And I remember my sleep patterns were starting to return to normal. I'm like, oh, I can sleep for 9 hours. Cool. Or 10 hours and 9. And then I remember about 8 months or 9 months after I discontinued the medication, I started developing one day at work, this sort of these cramps in my feet. And I didn't know where it came from. And, the cramps in my feet started, and then I'm like, okay, whatever. I've just been walking too much. And then the next day they got worse. And then the next day they got worse and worse until day 5, the pain from my hip or my stomach right down to my feet was so unbelievably overwhelming. I could barely walk. Wow. And it was like this. Yeah. It was like these electric bolts it was like somebody plugged in, an outlet into my lower spine and my legs. And I was incapacitating. I could literally barely walk. It was horrendous how much that pain was, and that's how it started.
And what was the cause of the pain? What were you told by medical doctors or whoever you sought help from?
Well, originally we thought it was mechanical. So you thought it was like a bulging disc. But I'll describe to you the symptoms because, somebody listening to this may resonate with it. But it was very, very intense electric bolts that ran, again, from my lower back right down to the bottom of my feet. And touching my feet to the ground would produce this rippling sensation right up to, again, my lower back, and just like electricity. It was just awful. Wow. So I would walk like my feet were kind of like this. I wouldn't want to put my feet flat because I would feel that pain and I would trigger those things in the bottom of my feet. And, originally we thought it might've been mechanical, but it wasn't. So I went to physiotherapy and all this stuff. And it turns out, I remember the diagnosis the one day when I went to see the physiatrist was he got in his recorder and he said polysensory peripheral neuropathy, ? Fibromyalgia, ? Chronic fatigue, ? So really those 3, right? And I think that was as formal as the diagnoses ever got. And that was quite a bit later. That was a year later when the pain had went body wide. So it was everywhere at this point. But that's where it started in my legs. Yeah, and it was unbelievable. Like people would see me, and I looked like someone who was, in a sense, it was very crippling. So
how old were you at this time, if you don't mind me asking?
23 or 24.
23. So at a time in your life that you're meant to be thriving and in your 20s, having so much fun, you're just literally incapacitated with all this pain. So what did you do, Brad?
Well, it was tough. It wasn't easy. There's nothing easy about that whatsoever. And, you can imagine going from relatively healthy and vibrant to just, okay, so now you're going to have troubles with work, severe troubles with work, because most of my work was standing. Now you're going to have troubles socializing. Now you're going to have troubles exercising. Now you're going to have troubles with your relationship. And now you're going to have trouble with your parents. Like, it was just awful. I remember like the thinking, the pain was one thing, and it was really, 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 really bad. But the other thing was when I would imagine my future and living like this the rest of my life, that thought was so overwhelming that I couldn't even go there. And that's when, my mindfulness training, it was awful. It's like, are you serious? I'm 23, 24. I'm going to live like this the rest of my life. And then you could become self-deprecating a little bit. Like, you're a bum, Brad. You're never going to recover. Like, these thoughts would spiral out of control. And so I needed to halt that. And I think one of the beautiful things was the mindfulness practice that I developed at that time, which really didn't
tell me about this.
Pain. Well, it was like, okay, I can deal with extreme pain and extreme anxiety about the future, or I can just deal with extreme pain. So, it was in a way, and I just finished my first, it's so strange because 5 weeks or 3 weeks, whatever it was, before the pain really started, I'd finished my first introduction to mindfulness, which was the 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction program done by John Kabat-Zinn, who's now doing a masterclass on it in the masterclass thing, which I saw. But I use those tools, every day. I had to. I didn't have a choice. It's like, okay, bro, even day to day, I wouldn't even think about me imagining get to the end of the day. It's like, can I just get through the next minute? Can I just get through the next 30 seconds? Because the pain was so overwhelming. It was just unbelievable.
And so how did these tools of mindfulness that you talk about, what did you practice in terms of mindfulness that really served you in this time?
Well, it was listening to YouTube guided meditations, and it was just breathing and focusing. Yeah. It was just breathing and focusing. Yeah.
And how did that help you?
And did you learn different breathing techniques?
At the time, no. I know all these fancy ones now, which are really interesting. But at the time, it was just like, no, just focus on your breath. That's it. Just be here, be now. Be here, be now.
Yeah.
The cliche advice you would hear about mindfulness is what I was really practicing. And the reason being, Erica, is again, the thoughts of my future were so overwhelming and scary. I couldn't handle it. I couldn't handle the extreme pain and the extreme thoughts of the future. So again, I found the willpower to focus on what I could control, which was my thinking.
Yeah.
And God,
and what Brad is sharing now, is so pivotal in terms of any adversity that we are navigating, whether it's a cancer diagnosis and we're so focused on that end result, right? Whether it's career loss, whether it's divorce, whether it's mental health struggles, whatever we are facing, it is so incredibly helpful to change that focus point off the end destination and bring it right back in to, as Brad even said, right here, right now, the power of now. I love Eckhart Tolle's work, in this book called The Power of Now. It's powerful, right? But bringing it back to what we can control, as Brad said, in our environment, right in this moment, brings back the power to us, takes away the power from the adversity that we're navigating. It's a great way to become empowered on our journey. Love this.
Yeah. To me, it was survival too. It was like I remember there was a woman in Australia, I think, and she sort of went through the same thing. And I remember hearing that story, which says, I don't need to get through the whole night. I just need to get through the next moment. And some days it was like that. Literally, it was like, okay. And especially when the pain became body wide, because it sort of morphed and transformed. It started in my legs, which was bad enough as it was. And then I did everything I could, by the way, to try and alleviate the pain. I went to physiotherapists and I changed my diet. I was always a healthy eater. That wasn't really an issue, but I did juicing and I did Reiki and I did massage and I did acupuncture, and I was stubborn. I tried everything.
But it sounds like it didn't all click until it was also connected with this whole mind-body connection and your idea of mindfulness and what you're talking about. And that was the final kind of closing that circle of all of this healing of what you needed to do. That's beautiful.
Yeah, I think the thing was when I went to see my brother one day who suffered from bilateral wrist tendonitis, and he'd been off work for a year. And I went to see him, and he was playing his video games. And I learned from Dr. John Sarno the connection between your unconscious mind and the pain that it produces. And that's since become very mainstream. There's a lot of physicians who work with that, the connection of mind body. But long story short is I went through a process of exploring my unconscious mind and how that connected to my pain and realizing they were the same thing.
Wow. And so to tell us today, you are thriving today. You have moved all the way over to Vietnam. Tell us about Brad today.
Brad today is fully healed, completely recovered, very, very aware of the mind-body connection and how that affects. And I'm back to kickboxing and at the gym, and I'm doing well, and all my chronic pain is gone. I suffered the chronic pain for 5 years. All of it's gone now. You know what I mean? I have little days where it spikes a bit, but now most of my role now is, I do executive coaching and corporate training with a heavy emphasis on personal empowerment and wellness. And that looks at mindfulness at work, that looks at confidence building, that looks at, improving performance through how we feel. And I'm so passionate about this stuff because it made such a night and day difference for my life. So everything I do is, conventional leadership training, but with a heavy emphasis on things like wellness and empowerment, habits, mindset, happiness, things like that. So it's so wonderful. And that's why Brian and I have had so many cool conversations about this stuff. So yeah, that's me today.
That's
trying
so
to give
excellent.
back, pay it forward in a way, and change the thinking over here around some of those things.
And Brad,
tell us, Brad, how can our listeners get in touch with you?
Well,
Go ahead.
LinkedIn is a great way. Yeah, LinkedIn is a great way. So my LinkedIn's the best. My website's being built for Repurpose You. And so I don't have an email today or the website to get in contact with, but I think the best way would be check me out on LinkedIn, or you can use my other business email, which is brad@topprospectcareers.com. That's TOPPROSPECTCAREERS.com. 4:30 in the morning. So I'm working.
Wow. And Brad, what would be one small piece of advice for a listener right now who's listening, who's feeling so overwhelmed, whether it's they're struggling with mental health or they're having chronic pain? What would be one thing they could do as soon as they finish listening to the program today that could help them in this moment? What would be one small thing you would recommend that they do?
Be in the present moment and breathe. Get on YouTube, watch a mindfulness video, focus on your breath, ground yourself, and then rejoice in the fact that today there's so many amazing resources for things like chronic pain, for things like mind-body healing, for things like mental health. And then be a little bit proactive. And I encourage anyone to find that willpower to seek help. And there's so many resources, so many people you can talk to. And it's so empowering when you share your story. It's just sharing your story brings you the resources in some aspects, because people can form a resonance with that and go, oh, I'm going through it too. Find community, find support, be in the present, move forward. And I think you'll find your answers for sure.
That's exactly why we're here to doing this podcast. I love this all, Brad. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Very, very welcome.
Yeah, you're a beautiful soul. You're doing amazing work. And truly, when we come out of our own personal stories and share that authentically, it's so powerful. And so thank you for being so authentic and real and joyful as well about where you're at now, and an inspiration for others. So thank you.
And I love that word. I love that word rejoice that you use. So risers, thrivers, let's rejoice today. And let's be inspired by Brad. We hope you found inspiration today. And we have an excellent next show to bring you with Mac Marcoux, who's a para-Olympian skier who does it all through the eyes of being blind. Be inspired. Yes, we can't wait to bring you that show. Thank you, everyone. All the best. Have a great day.
Thank you.